Good morning, evening, or afternoon, whichever one's going on for you at this current point in time. Today we're going to be talking about issues that you may be having with leaks to your manifold gauge set. Now, I picked this up recently from Harbor Freight, not only because I just wanted something temporary, kind of quick, just to kind of get some AC, assessments done, but also because some people want to jump straight into the deep end. They'll go for a field piece, or they'll go for a yellow jacket or some higher quality one. And totally, if you have the money to do that, by all means, go for a higher model, go for a better version of this tool. But for those of you who are unfamiliar, this is an HVAC R134A only manifold gauge set. So with the help of two hoses, and if you haven't seen me use this video, I did recently diagnose a Honda's AC system recently, so I will leave that either in the description or as one of the last videos you see as one of the recommendeds, those little boxes, I'll leave it there. But essentially, this is supposed to hold pressure in these lines and tell you what they are. So they should be within spec to let you know if your HVAC or your AC system is running the way it's supposed to. With that being said, I picked this up probably 2 weeks ago, and I noticed a bit of an issue. And that is that if you look right here, you'll see that there is nothing because I cleaned it, but I was getting some refrigerant pooling out right here. Now I thought, hey, I'll just take it back to the store. But sometimes manufacturers, again, usually cheaper manufacturers, will send some PTFE tape with their manifold gauge sets so that you can purposefully remove your fittings wherever they may be. They may be the storage fittings, it may be the gauge fittings themselves, it could be the fill or the charge nozzle here. So there may be leaks that happen. It happens. So before we go blaming the tool, what you will need potentially is maybe you just need to snug them down. Maybe they just came a little loose. Maybe from the factory they just didn't have the right amount of sealant. So a lot of people will say either use a liquid sealant or use PTFE. Now, I use Blue Monster for my stuff. Again, no sponsorship. That's just what I like to use. But a lot of people will say, well, anything that will seal a pipe will seal this. And yes, but the issue is that if it happens to expand or if it happens to move up, and I'm going to show you where it could get into, it could cause an obstruction with your manifold set and cause issues with incorrect temperatures or the like. It just started raining. So you will need either a 14mm wrench right over here, or if you happen to not have metric for whatever reason, which again, you should have both, get a master set. You could always, in theory, use a, it's a little more slop as far as like looseness. So if you're trying to go for the more accurate, go for the 14mm. Now, if you pull off your gauge, which all it takes is a few turns, I got my leak here. I haven't had any leaks on my high side, but I would assume if it happened to the low side, it's only a matter of time. So that is where it threads in to your manifold set. So you see that hole right there. That's where the pressure, of course, comes in so that the gauge can measure it. So using any kind of liquid sealant, you run the risk of that the risk of that liquid or that goop or that glue or that adhesive getting down into your manifold and causing issues later. It may not happen right away, but you never know. Now, something I'm going to grab right over here just for the sake of showing you is thread sealant. Now, some people are going to say Loctite, but thread locker or thread lock is the product itself, right? Just like you don't blow your nose on a Kleenex, you don't rub Vaseline on your face, right? It's petroleum jelly. It's an adhesive bandage, not a Band-Aid. Band-Aid is the company. You get where I'm going with this. So if you hear thread lock, or if you hear Loctite, they mean thread locker or thread lock sealant. So this is medium strength. Again, people say get the blue one, get the red ones. One's too aggressive, one's not enough. Across the board, whether you're using PTFE or thread lock or pipe thread sealant, it'll all hold. But I prefer tape because if there is an issue where I need to remove it and reapply, that's not going to be an issue. These are rated for gas and for water leaks. So I like this because if I need to reapply, I can always do that. So if we check out our gauge, again, there's no damage to it, nothing's wrong with it. But if you zoom in action, you'll see that this just comes with threads. There's no seal, there's no rubber, there's no O-ring, there's no gasket, there's nothing. It's just connection to connection. So, you know, it kind of is what it is. So having some kind of liquid sealant, or in this case, PTFE, we are going to add a little bit and check for leaks. Now, while I wrap this, I just want to make it very clear that you should be using 1/2 inch, right? 1/2 inch thick. They do have the 3/4 stuff, and obviously you can just cut it in half, if anything. But this way, it's essentially the same size as the gauge itself, if you look at it. Now remember that only about half of the threads are going to actually be sitting in the gauge. You see what that black line is? That's a witness mark from the factory. So your threads are only going to go to here, so you only need that much. I would also recommend that you not wrap the first thread, just so that you're not having to force and push in as you turn in order to get it to thread into the manifold. Sound good? Let me wrap this up. Now, small tip, you never want to pull the way I just did, just to show you, you never want to pull your PTFE straight out because it causes that weird crinkling, right? So when you have PTFE, try to have some scissors nearby or try to cut them horizontally. You never want to have them just pulled from the source because they end up snapping back and crinkling. And then you get all this. Fun fact, or a little, tip of the day. Now remember to wrap in the direction that your threads are going in, because if you wrap them in the opposite direction, you will end up actually undoing the tape as it kind of tightens down. And remember, right there, that first thread, do not wrap it. Why? Again, because you want it to sit as easily as possible without you having to sit here and palm down the threads. Trust me, as you, not torque it down, but as you tighten it, the threads will rip through where they need to and create that seal. Then we add it to the manifold. Now once it gets tight, you do not want to over tighten this. Again, whatever wrench you may have, you want to get it just facing forward. No more, no less. So once it's good, this little protector will kind of give you a good idea of whether it's oriented perfectly. So if you notice that they're kind of cocked funny, and then you can just give them a tighten. But with these, you never want to tighten them up and then loosen them again, because then you might get a small leak. So if you need to, remove it, retape them, and then same thing goes for any of these fittings here. So you got your high side. I love that it comes with protective caps, by the way. And you also keep an eye out for leaks around the sight glass. You never know. Now, as you can see, the threads here on the manifold for the high side don't have any tape. So obviously that doesn't look very good. If you want to go in there with a blade and just cut around and take out the tape that is exposed, you're more than welcome to do that. As long as you're not digging a knife in that could potentially create a leak, just the surface showing around these exposed threads. Okay, now the way you can check for leak is in two ways. You can either use oxygen or compressed air, which is mostly free if you have the tools, or you can use nitrogen, but I wouldn't recommend, needing to buy, special air or special gas rather, just for a diagnostic tool. But essentially, you're going to put the hoses on, close the manifold gauge set, and then have the gauges hold pressure within these lines, and you're going to measure them to make sure that you're not losing any. If you start noticing that they're teetering down, you have a leak. Now it could be that you didn't tighten these enough. It could be that you didn't sufficiently put a sealant wherever it may be. You may have a leak at one of these fittings. If you have an older unit, again, newer ones should not be leaking anytime soon. Or it could potentially be, let me grab one of these. It could be that one of your hoses, you just didn't thread this down enough, or it could be that these little seals inside, you'll see that these are black rubber. Harbor Freight did also sell a plastic version of this, where this little seal was like a white clear plastic. I'm not sure if they still sell them, but make sure you get ones that have good rubber seals and not cheap plastic ones. And make sure that you thread these down enough to where it's actually creating a seal. They might be loose. Same thing goes from the side. That's going to, let me back you up. You look like you need some personal space. I apologize. But if you're going to be connecting it to the coupler, you also want to make sure that you have a good connection here. Because again, there is no rubber seal on the coupler itself, only inside of the hose right over here. Now, you can get your tire inflator or compressed air, anything like that. You're going to close these up, make sure these are nice and snug, and then you can use a check valve or some kind of closed system to add compressed air. Me personally, I would use the rubber seal that's in here, cap off the charge line, and because this has a valve here, it's going to hold. You would just keep that closed. With these, obviously these are plastic caps, so they're not sealed. You would have to add your hoses, excuse me, you would have to add your hoses and your couplers, because your couplers have valves here, check valves, so they're not going to leak. But obviously it's going to leak through here when you're trying to add compressed air. So you add your coupler to your hose, add the other side of the hose obviously to your manifold, and then you're going to take a small bit that can fit over this Schrader, and you can add your compressed air. Me personally, I would recommend going to probably about 50, about anywhere from like 50, 40, because that's typically what your compressor is going to be on at 134 in a car when it's under work. And then it's going to be ambient temperature higher any other time. Same thing with the high side. You don't need to run it to 300, 500 just to see if it's holding a leak. You just want to get to about 50. If you can get 50 here and 50 here and just hold the pressure, they should not lose pressure for a long time. I'm talking you come back in a few hours, and if you see that they even drop a little bit, you need to check for a leak around your hose. Maybe you didn't tighten it enough. Maybe you didn't squeeze down on the knob enough. Maybe you didn't add enough tape or lock sealant, right? If you're using this stuff. Me personally, again, that hole where you saw, I don't want any of this getting down into my manifold. Or this. Some people say that pipe thread sealant will expand and make its way down into the manifold. For the sake of not having to pay $70 again, I'd rather not do that to my manifold. But I know there's probably some people out there like, I've had my kit for 40 years and it's never been a problem. Well, great for you. Thank you, and continue to use your product, and leave a comment letting me know what you use. Cool. But for the sake of not damaging anything, it's much easier to get PTFE tape out and put new tape in. Now, did you honestly think I was going to end this video without actually testing my work? Of course not. So let me get all of this out of the way. I'm going to hook up the hose to the low side. I know this doesn't have a leak, but again, you can test both sides, of course, just to make sure that both sides are holding. I do have a tire inflator here. This is my rigid tire inflator. Loud noises are incoming. So I'll try to make that lower so you don't blow out your eardrums. But that right there is not going to fix it because it's way too big. What I like about the rigid is it comes with different attachments. And so you can add these to the quick connect and add it to a bike pump or a basketball, football, whatever you need. So that's nice and snug, and then you get your air coming out of here, and it sits perfectly over that valve. Can you see that? Hold up. Focus, you. All right. So you see the valve here in the center, that pin? It's going to fit almost perfectly in there. And then because the digital inflator can actually be set to a specific PSI, I can not have to worry about potentially damaging my machine by going way over what's necessary. So if I want to set it to 50, I can do that with no issue. And now it's going to sit there and it's going to keep pushing air until it reaches a sealed pressure of 50, and then it'll cut itself off. So either you do that or you can set it to manual and just kind of eyeball it until you get to 50 and then close the valve. So let me get the hose and I'll be right back. Ooh, that thunder is storming. It's raining. So make sure that black seal is sitting right up against the manifold and give it a good tighten. For those of you who are unfamiliar, there is a difference. See how this has a little shaft? This goes toward the manifold, not toward the coupler, right? This blunt side, as you can see here, it's open with a seal because the coupler itself has the valve here. So you need open to closed, not closed to closed and open to open, in case you didn't know. So you give this a good tighten. Now because this is sealed, this is just going to move forward and back, but it is sealed. It's only going to take pressure when it's, you know, being forced on this side, right? When there's something actually depressing it to allow pressure into your gauge. So this one is going to be tight. There's no worry here. You want to leave this open because we are obviously connecting this center portion into here. Now, once you have your pressure, that's when you're going to lock it in. So I'm going to try to get to 50 and then I'm going to lock it in and show you. And then we're going to come back in like 30 minutes, maybe an hour, and make sure that there's no leaks. If they are, the leak could be coming from here, or potentially from where we just added the tape. Keep an eye out. All right, so after a bit of fiddling and being very careful not to overwhelm the machine, you can see that it's sitting right at maybe a hair just below 50 psi. So it's going to be holding. Now, of course, you're not going to see liquid because it's just air, but you want to make sure it's not losing any pressure. So I'm looking at about 49.5 psi, right? Make sure this is tight, 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 tight. And we're going to come back. Ziggy, set 30 minutes. So if we come back in 30 minutes and there is a drop in psi, then we know we have a leak. If not, we're good. Just a quick point of view. A lot of people that I've seen testing have actually just taken their fitting and they'll, not their manifold, of course, don't do that, but they'll take their fitting and just dunk it under water and they'll be like, yep, that's how you test if you have a leak here. I don't know about that. So if you happen to see those videos, do be a little dubious. Obviously, the whole point is that it's, you know, water and air tight. So if you see any bubbles, of course, but I don't know about that. Just, you can test it with air, You can test it with, you know, actual sealed systems of refrigerant. So I don't know about, you know, submersing these. So be careful. Stop. All right. So now they got the timer out of the way. That's 30 minutes. Now let's come back here and investigate. So we had about 48 and a half, 49 psi. And if we look, zoom in action, we are at, yeah, we're just behind 48. So sometimes it can be a little iffy when you're randomly spraying. So even if I set back up, even if I set 50 here, you want to make sure this is 100% and it'll hold. Now, if you want it to be 1,000,000% sure, don't touch it, right? Make sure everything is tight. Come back like 24 hours later. Realistically speaking, these things, when they're sealed in a system, they should not be leaking whatsoever. But again, that's how you would test this. Again, you could test it with refrigerant, which is not good because if you have a leak, you'll be leaking vapor and liquid refrigerant. That's not good. You could try it with nitrogen. Again, same concept applies. You would just have to hook this up to a nitrogen tank. Now, it also might come to your attention that some people will say dip it in water. And so rather than doing that, some people will say, hey, I got a little bit of dish soap, or maybe you're a plumber and you have an extra bottle of mega bubble or some kind of bubbler to test whether or not there is a leak. So again, these are meant to be used on a car. Sometimes it rains, so you can get these wet, don't worry. So instead of direct spray, just give it a spritz. And you're looking for any signs of bubbling. So I can tell, you can see that there would be a leak somewhere here, and there is not. So that's the first section. I'm gonna let this fall because it's gonna keep wanting to. Next, with the actual fitting itself, make sure this is like 99% bubble and only enough water to really saturate it. Now the bubbles are pop. Let me see if I can get you in here. Zoom in action. You can see the bubbles. The bubbles are popping away, but they're not creating new bubbles. When they start expanding, that's when you know you've got a leak. So the last place, and you don't want to get it into anything. Just good. Now it's just under 50, so still looking for that leak. So right now it's 10:30 in the morning, 10:39. We're gonna come back 5 hours and we'll see what is what. Does PTFE work, or should you be using the liquid stuff? Let's see. Now, the alarm just went off. We are now 5 hours later. It is 3:43 p.m. And so, looking at our gauge, we have dropped down probably about half a PSI, 1 PSI. Zoom in action. So we started at 50, we're now at 49. That can happen for a multitude of reasons, including user error. It could be that I didn't quite wrench it down enough, and so some of the air, maybe like half a PSI, 1 PSI, got into this little area, but it is still holding here, if anything. So this is good. Again, 30 minutes and then 5 hours later, dropping half a PSI is not a big deal. Also be careful, because sometimes if you over tighten your fittings, that can also cause a small leak, and it might be small enough to lose half a PSI or a third of a PSI, but not enough to cause bubbles to start forming. So let's releasing das air, and we are back to 0. So if for whatever reason you notice that you're spraying everything and you're getting a leak around the fitting here, look for this seal right here. They do sell tools to get in there and remove that core so that you can get these seals out, put the new one in, thread the core back in, and you're good to go. Same thing with the coupling side, so be aware of those seals. And again, sometimes you can find alternate pieces, so better quality hoses for your existing manifold, better manifolds for your better quality hoses, better couplers, and keep an eye out for Schrader valves or any of the O-rings. If you need to change them, replace them, lubricate them before putting them in. So there you go. If you happen to have an issue with a leak, you can use PTFE. Of course, you can use thread lock. You can use your pipe thread sealant. Be careful with those. Otherwise, I'm going to also leave a link to Nylog, which is an HVAC specific type of thread sealant. It is capable of creating a, what is it called? A hydraulic barrier that is made to be sealed at high PSIs or high pressures. So that is what I would recommend if you are going to go with something liquid. Otherwise, PTFE is more than capable. With that being said, thank you so much for watching, and until next time, work smart. You're over here.